The old auction house smelled like dust and secrets. Ethan wandered through rows of forgotten treasures. He stopped at a tarnished mirror, its ornate frame covered in cobwebs. Something about it drew him in. He bid on a whim, ignoring the strange feeling in his gut. "Sold!" the auctioneer bellowed. Ethan was now the owner of the antique mirror. He carried it to his car, its weight heavier than he expected. As he drove home, he glanced at the mirror in his rearview mirror. For a second, he thought he saw a figure standing behind him. He shook his head, laughing nervously. Ethan lived alone in a small, quiet house, the perfect place for a fresh start. He hoped the mirror, despite its eerie vibe, would add some character to his living room. He leaned it against the wall, its dark surface reflecting the bare walls. "It's just a mirror," he muttered, trying to convince himself. The next morning, Ethan woke with an unsettling feeling. He couldn't shake off the image from the rearview mirror. He walked past the antique mirror, stopping to look at his reflection. His face seemed paler than usual, his eyes shadowed. "Just tired," he mumbled, forcing a smile. But deep down, doubt lingered. Days turned into weeks. Ethan grew accustomed to the mirror's presence, yet he couldn't bring himself to hang it. It remained leaning against the wall, a constant silent observer. He started noticing things. Objects moved slightly. Whispers seemed to dance at the edge of his hearing. He dismissed it as his imagination, but fear was a seed taking root. One night Ethan woke to a cold draft. The mirror was glowing faintly, a soft pulsating light emanating from its surface. He sat up in bed, heart pounding. He could have sworn he saw a figure standing in front of the mirror. It vanished before he could focus. "This is crazy," he whispered, pulling the blanket over his head. But sleep wouldn't come. Not that night. The next day, Ethan tried to rationalize the events. He convinced himself it was stress, lack of sleep. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He avoided looking at the mirror, afraid of what he might see. But the mirror had other plans. As Ethan passed by, his gaze was involuntarily drawn to the mirror. He froze. His reflection was gone. Instead, he saw a young boy, his face pale and drawn, his eyes filled with a terror he recognized as his own. The boy reached out from the mirror, his hand a ghostly apparition against the glass. Ethan stumbled back, knocking over a lamp in his haste. The sound of shattering glass seemed to break the spell. The mirror was just a mirror again, reflecting his own terrified face. He stood there, heart racing, trying to catch his breath. He couldn't ignore it any longer. The mirror was not what it seemed. That night the whispers returned. They were louder now, closer, slithering around the edges of his sanity. He could almost make out words, a name repeated over and over again. His name. Ethan's blood ran cold. He covered his ears, but the whispers seemed to penetrate his very skull. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Ethan went to the library. He spent hours poring over ancient texts, his fear fueled by the growing suspicion that the mirror was not just haunted, it was a conduit, a portal to somewhere dark and terrifying. He stumbled upon a passage that made his blood run cold. Mirrors, it read, are not mere reflectors of light, but gateways to realms unseen. Beware the reflection that calls to you, for it seeks not your image, but your soul. Ethan slammed the book shut, his heart pounding against his ribs. He had to do something. He had to stop it. The whispers grew stronger, more insistent. Ethan's fear intensified, morphing into a paralyzing terror. He felt a constant, chilling presence in the house. He was no longer alone. He knew that now. One night, as he lay in bed, too terrified to sleep, he saw it, the figure from the mirror. It stood at the foot of his bed, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It was the boy from the reflection, but older now, his features twisted in a grotesque mockery of childhood. "You can't hide forever," the figure rasped, its voice like dry leaves scraping against pavement. Ethan wanted to scream, to run, but terror had him frozen in place. The figure reached out a spectral hand, its touch sending a jolt of icy fear through Ethan's body. "You're mine now," it hissed, its breath a cold wind that seemed to steal the air from his lungs. Days blurred into an endless parade of horror. The figure appeared more frequently, always watching, always present. Ethan became a prisoner in his own home, too afraid to leave, too terrified to stay. The whispers were constant now, a maddening chorus that echoed his growing fear. Ethan's reflection in the mirror was no longer his own. He saw the boy's face staring back, his eyes filled with a chilling familiarity. The boy was him, and he was the boy. Their fates intertwined in a macabre dance of terror. He knew he couldn't outrun this. He had to confront it. He had to face the reflection in the mirror and break the hold it had on him. But how? Driven to the brink, Ethan sought help. He found himself on the doorstep of an old woman who lived at the edge of town. Legend had it she possessed a unique understanding of the supernatural. She listened intently as Ethan poured out his heart, his voice trembling with fear and exhaustion. The old woman, her eyes filled with a wisdom that belied her years, nodded slowly. "The mirror is a conduit," she confirmed, her voice raspy with age. "It feeds on your fear, your terror. It seeks to consume you whole." "What can I do?" Ethan pleaded, his voice a desperate whisper. The old woman's gaze was steady, her voice firm. "You must face your fear, young man. You must look into the heart of the reflection and claim what is rightfully yours." Armed with the old woman's cryptic advice, Ethan returned home. The house felt colder, the air thick with anticipation. The whispers were deafening. He stood before the mirror, his heart pounding against his ribs. He took a deep breath and looked into the reflection. The boy's face stared back, a cruel smile twisting his lips. But this time, Ethan saw something different in those eyes. Sadness, desperation. He saw himself not as a monster, but as a victim, a trapped soul seeking release. Ethan understood. The boy wasn't trying to hurt him, he was trying to escape. The mirror wasn't a prison for Ethan, it was a prison for the boy. And Ethan held the key. "I see you," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible above the cacophony of whispers. The reflection's eyes widened in surprise, the cruel smile faltering. "I know you're trapped. I can help you." The figure in the mirror trembled, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. The whispers grew louder, angrier. "Don't listen to them," Ethan said, his voice gaining strength. "They want to keep us both here, but we can be free." Ethan reached out and touched the mirror. The moment his fingers made contact, a surge of energy pulsed through him. He was pulled forward, his body sucked into the reflective surface. The whispers became screams as the world around him dissolved into a swirling vortex of darkness. Ethan found himself standing in a cold, dark room. The air was thick with the stench of decay and despair. Before him stood the boy, his form solid now, his eyes filled with gratitude and something else. Hope. "Thank you," the boy whispered, his voice trembling. "You freed us both." He reached out and took Ethan's hand. "We can leave this place now, together." Ethan wasn't sure what awaited them beyond this place. But as he followed the boy toward the light, he knew one thing for certain. He was no longer afraid. He had faced his fear, and in doing so he had found his freedom. Or had he? The faint light they walked toward seemed to flicker, and for a fleeting moment Ethan thought he saw the grinning face of the boy reflected back at him.